The house felt different the moment the last guest left, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. And Emma noticed it right away as she gathered empty glasses from the living room and carried them to the kitchen. The echo of laughter, still hanging faintly in the air, because just minutes ago the space had been warm and full. Friends talking over one another, music low and comfortable. Mark smiling as he always did when people admired the home they had built together. But now there was only quiet and the soft hum of the refrigerator. And that was when Emma sensed she wasn't alone, a feeling subtle but certain. Like realizing someone is standing behind you without hearing their steps. And when she turned, she saw Daniel near the window, his tall frame half lit by the streetlight outside. His coat still on, as if he had planned to leave, but changed his mind at the last second. And for a moment, she wondered if Mark had asked him to stay back for something simple. Maybe a favor or a forgotten conversation, because Daniel was Mark's closest friend, the one who had been there long before she came into the picture. Steady and dependable. The kind of man who never demanded attention, yet somehow always noticed everything. And Emma forced a small smile and said everyone had already gone. Her voice light and polite, but Daniel didn't return the easy smile she expected. Instead, he nodded slowly and said he knew, and the way he said it made her pause because it wasn't casual. It sounded heavy, like a door closing softly, but firmly, and before she could ask anything more, Mark appeared in the hallway, keys in hand, saying he needed to drop another friend home and would be back soon. His tone rushed, but cheerful, the way it always was when he moved from one responsibility to the next. And Emma almost offered to go with him, but stopped herself, telling him it was fine, and he kissed her cheek quickly before leaving, trusting the space he was leaving behind without question. And when the front door closed, the silence returned stronger than before, wrapping around Emma and Daniel, stretching longer than was comfortable, and Emma busied herself at the sink, rinsing plates she had already cleaned. Just to break the stillness, while Daniel remained by the window, unmoving, as if he were waiting for the right moment to step forward or speak, and finally he said her name, not loudly, not dramatically, just clearly. And something in the way he said it made her stop what she was doing because it carried intention. And when she turned to face him, she saw uncertainty in his eyes mixed with resolve, an expression she had never seen on him before. And he told her there was something he needed to say, that he had waited for the right time, and that tonight felt like the only chance. And Emma felt a small knot form in her chest. Not fear exactly, but a sense that a simple evening had shifted into something she hadn't prepared for, and she asked if everything was okay. Her voice steady, though her thoughts were racing, and Daniel answered that nothing was wrong. But something had been unsaid for too long, and he didn't want to leave without being honest, and he took a step back as if to make it clear he meant no harm, explaining he would speak quickly and then go, that he wasn't asking for anything, just offering words that had been carried quietly for years. And Emma listened, confused but attentive, because there was no threat in his tone, only sincerity. And he told her that long before she became Mark's wife, before life settled into routines and shared calendars. He had noticed her in a small, forgettable moment that she likely didn't remember. A brief meeting that stayed with him, not because of romance, but because of the calm kindness she carried. And he explained that he had buried those feelings out of respect and loyalty, never letting them show, never letting them grow into something dangerous. But that watching her over the years, seeing how she supported everyone else while quietly setting aside her own needs, had made him realize that silence could also be unfair. And as he spoke, Emma felt a strange mix of surprise and recognition. Because his words weren't romantic in the way movies made romance loud and reckless. They were gentle, careful, and rooted in respect, and that made them harder to dismiss. And when she asked why he was telling her now, Daniel answered honestly that he didn't want to carry regret, that he wanted her to know she was seen and valued as a person, not just as someone's wife. And those words landed deeper than she expected. because Emma had not realized how long it had been since someone spoke to her with that kind of awareness. And before she could respond, headlights swept across the room, signaling Mark's return, and the moment cracked open and began to close all at once. Daniel straightened, the intensity fading back into the familiar calm she had always known, and he said he should leave, thanking her for listening. And Emma stood there holding a plate she hadn't finished drying, knowing that whatever had just been spoken could not be taken back, that something invisible but powerful had entered the quiet spaces of her life, and as the door opened and Mark stepped back inside, smiling and unaware, Emma realized that the night had already changed, not because of what had happened, but because of what had finally been said. The moment Daniel left that night, the house returned to its normal shape, but Emma felt as if something inside her had shifted and refused to settle back. And over the next few days, she moved through her routine with a strange alertness, noticing details she once ignored, like how quiet the mornings felt, even with Mark sitting across the table, how conversations stayed practical and never drifted into feelings, and how she often listened more than she spoke. And Daniel's words stayed with her, not as a secret thrill, but as a question she couldn't push away, because he hadn't confessed love or asked for anything reckless. He had simply named something real, that she was seen, and that idea followed her everywhere. From the grocery store to late evenings folding laundry, and when she finally saw Daniel again at a small gathering at a mutual friend's house, the air between them felt different, not tense but aware, and he greeted her politely, asking about her work, her day, ordinary things, as if nothing unusual had happened. Yet Emma sensed the care behind his calm distance, and later, when the group split into smaller conversations, Daniel found himself beside her on the back porch, the night cool and quiet, and he spoke first, telling her he hoped he hadn't made things uncomfortable, that he hadn't meant to bring confusion into her life. And Emma answered honestly that she wasn't angry or afraid, only thoughtful, because what he said had opened her eyes to emotions she hadn't known how to name. And Daniel listened carefully, not interrupting, not trying to guide her response. And that patience made her trust him more. And she admitted that marriage had slowly turned into shared tasks instead of shared feelings, that she loved Mark but felt distant from herself, and Daniel nodded, saying that was why he spoke up. Not to change her path, but to remind her she mattered as an individual. And before the conversation could grow heavier, Mark called out to Emma from inside, and Daniel stepped back naturally, giving space without being asked, and the rest of the evening passed smoothly. But Emma noticed how Daniel never lingered too close, never crossed a line. His respect clear in every small action, and that restraint stayed with her longer than his words ever could. And that night, lying awake beside Mark, Emma finally understood that what unsettled her was not Daniel's feelings, but her own silence, because she had grown used to setting aside her needs to keep peace. And now she wondered when that habit began. And the next morning she made a choice she had avoided for years. She spoke to Mark, not accusing or dramatic, but honest, telling him she felt unseen and tired of pretending everything was fine. And Mark looked surprised at first, then concerned, admitting he hadn't noticed the distance but didn't deny it existed. And their conversation moved quickly, touching years of unspoken habits, missed moments, and quiet misunderstandings. And though it wasn't easy, it was real and over. The following weeks they tried to reconnect, scheduling time together, listening more carefully. But Emma realized that effort alone didn't fix everything, because awareness had changed her. And during this time, Daniel stayed respectful and distant, never reaching out, never inserting himself, which made Emma understand that his honesty had never been about winning her over. It had been about truth. And when she finally saw him again at another gathering, she felt calmer, more grounded, and she thanked him quietly for his honesty, telling him it had pushed her to face her own life more clearly. and Daniel smiled, gently, saying that was all he had hoped for. And in that moment, Emma understood that some connections are not meant to be acted upon, but learned from. That some people enter our lives not to stay, but to wake us up. And as the night went on, she noticed how Daniel watched from a respectful distance. Not with longing, but with peace, accepting whatever outcome came. And Emma felt a deep sense of clarity because she now knew that her future depended not on hidden feelings or dramatic choices, but on honesty, courage, and the willingness to speak before silence turned into regret. And as she left the gathering with Mark, holding his hand more firmly than before, she realized that Daniel's words had already done what they were meant to do. They had changed everything without breaking anything, and that understanding settled in her heart, steady and lasting. As the night moved quietly forward, asterisk days passed after that gathering, and Emma felt as if time had picked up speed while her thoughts stayed sharp and restless. Because even though life looked normal from the outside, something inside her refused to return to how it was before. And she noticed how conversations with Mark carried more honesty now, but also more weight. As if both of them were carefully choosing words they once used without thinking. And while they tried to reconnect, Emma realized effort alone did not erase years of quiet distance. It only exposed it more clearly. And during this time, Daniel stayed away without explanation. No messages, no casual check-ins, no appearances that felt accidental. And that absence spoke louder than any confession ever could, 'cause it proved his respect was real. And yet Emma found herself thinking about him often. Not with longing, but with curiosity, wondering how one conversation could change her view of herself so deeply. And one evening, while sorting old photos on her laptop, Emma came across pictures from early in her marriage, smiling faces, relaxed moments. And she felt a quiet ache because she remembered feeling lighter then, more present, and she wondered when she had stopped speaking her mind so freely. And the answer wasn't tied to Mark alone, but to the way life slowly trained her to put herself last. And the next day, when Mark came home tired and distracted, Emma chose honesty again, telling him she felt like she had been shrinking to fit into routines instead of growing with him. And Mark listened, truly listened this time, admitting he had mistaken comfort for closeness, and though the conversation was calm, it left both of them thoughtful and unsettled, because awareness changes things whether people are ready or not. And later that week, Emma unexpectedly ran into Daniel at a bookstore downtown, a quiet place where coincidence felt too loud to ignore. And when their eyes met, there was a brief pause, not awkward but careful, and Daniel smiled politely, asking how she had been. His tone warm but reserved, and Emma answered honestly that she had been thinking a lot, learning things about herself she had ignored for too long. And Daniel nodded, saying growth often begins with discomfort, and they walked between shelves for a few minutes talking about simple things, books, work, the changing weather. Yet beneath the ordinary words there was understanding. And Emma noticed how Daniel never pushed the conversation toward feelings or the past. He allowed it to stay safe, and that made her respect him even more. And before leaving, Daniel said he was glad she seemed stronger, more sure of herself. And Emma realized that strength was something she hadn't felt in years. And as they parted ways, she understood that whatever connection existed between them had already served its purpose. And that night, Emma sat alone on the porch, listening to the distant sounds of traffic, thinking about how easily life could have gone in a different direction if Daniel had acted differently. If he had asked for more instead of offering clarity. And she felt grateful for his restraint, because it allowed her to face her marriage without guilt or confusion. And over the following weeks, Mark and Emma continued their honest conversations, some hopeful, some difficult, but always real. And Emma stopped pretending she was satisfied when she wasn't, and Mark stopped assuming silence meant peace. And although their relationship did not suddenly become perfect, it became truthful, and that truth brought moments of closeness they had not felt in years. And one evening at a mutual friend's dinner, Emma and Daniel crossed paths again, and this time the air between them felt calm, settled, as if something unfinished had found its ending without words. And Daniel spoke briefly with Mark, laughing easily, showing no sign of tension or regret. And Emma watched them and realized how important it was that nothing had been broken. Because Daniel had chosen honor over desire, and she had chosen awareness over escape. And as the night ended and Emma and Mark drove home together, Emma felt a strange sense of peace, not because all answers were clear, but because she was no longer hiding from questions. And she understood that part 3 of her story was not about choosing between people, but about choosing herself, her voice, her truth, and allowing that choice to quietly reshape everything that came next. Months had passed since that night when Daniel stayed behind, and Emma felt the subtle shift in her life ripple quietly but steadily. Because although nothing dramatic had happened, every small decision now carried weight, and she noticed it. In the way she spoke to Mark, in the way she allowed herself to express thoughts she had once swallowed, and in the way she listened to him, really listened. Without letting routines and distractions blur the edges of their connection. And Mark, for his part, seemed surprised at first by the new clarity in her words, but he responded with openness, admitting he had never realized how much distance had crept in over the years, how he had mistaken comfort and habit for true closeness. And their conversations became longer, more honest, touching, not just daily logistics, but feelings they had both ignored, and while they worked through these truths, Daniel remained a quiet presence in her mind. Not because of desire, but because of the lesson he had given her. That being seen mattered, that honesty had power, and that respect could be more profound than passion. And one evening, after a long talk about hopes and fears that stretched, until the house grew dark around them, Emma found herself reflecting on how differently life could have gone, imagining what it would have been like if she had acted on the emotions stirred by Daniel's words. But she dismissed the thought quickly, because it was never about acting on temptation. It had always been about understanding herself, and that understanding had guided her toward Mark, toward real connection, toward choices rooted in love and awareness rather than confusion. And as the days turned into weeks, Emma noticed subtle changes in Mark, small efforts to reach her, a question asked with genuine curiosity, a shared joke that felt light instead of forced, moments of attention that built slowly but surely. And she realized that relationships are not revived in grand gestures, but in repeated acts of care and recognition. And during this time, Daniel appeared again at a small dinner gathering, and Emma caught his eye across the room. And there was a quiet acknowledgement, a warmth that carried no urgency. No unspoken pressure, only acceptance. And Daniel smiled politely, as if to say he remembered. But he did not intrude. He simply existed in that space as a reminder of clarity and restraint, and Emma felt grateful for it, for his honesty had helped her claim her own voice, and she understood that some people enter our lives not to stay forever, but to awaken something within us. And that awakening does not require dramatic consequences, only truth. And that night, walking home with Mark hand in hand, Emma felt the steady pulse of certainty that had eluded her for years. The feeling that she could speak without fear, that her emotions were valid, and that the love she shared with Mark was strengthened by authenticity rather than complacency. And over the following weeks, Emma and Mark continued this journey quietly, making time for small moments together, sharing thoughts that might have once gone unsaid, and creating space for laughter, reflection, and patience. And Emma began to see how easily life could slip into habit without awareness. How long-term relationships require constant attention, not as a duty, but as a choice. And she realized that Daniel's presence in her life had been a catalyst, a gentle push toward seeing herself clearly, toward understanding what she needed to feel fulfilled, and toward recognizing that her marriage could grow stronger when grounded in honesty. And one afternoon, at another gathering with friends, Emma noticed Daniel across the room again, and their eyes met briefly. A shared moment of recognition and respect. And there was no tension, no unspoken longing. Only the calm understanding that what had been spoken months ago had done its work. That clarity had replaced uncertainty. And Emma smiled softly at him, conveying gratitude without words. And Daniel returned the gesture with a polite nod. And in that exchange, Emma felt closure, not as an ending, but as a confirmation that truth can change everything without breaking the past. And she reflected on how life often places people in our paths for lessons, not for drama. And sometimes those lessons are the most profound, shaping choices quietly, influencing hearts without demanding attention. And she thought about her own growth, the courage it took to speak, to acknowledge feelings, to confront distance and disconnection, and the relief of realizing that honesty, even when uncomfortable, opens doors to connection rather than shutting them. And later that evening, Emma and Mark sat together in the living room, lights dimmed, a quiet comfort surrounding them, and they talked about small dreams and plans, the future feeling tangible yet flexible. And Emma realized she no longer feared the gaps that had once existed between them, because she understood that love is not perfect or static, but evolving, requiring acknowledgement, attention, and the willingness to face truths. And she recognized that Daniel's words had not created confusion or temptation, they had created awareness, and that awareness had allowed her to embrace her marriage with renewed clarity, gratitude, and patience. And as she looked at Mark, hearing the steady cadence of his voice, she felt a depth of affection and commitment she had long taken for granted. And she understood that her heart could hold respect, love, and clarity all at once. And that the choices she made now would shape the life she wanted, a life of honesty, of connection, of emotional presence. And in that understanding, Emma felt free, not from desire, not from challenges, but from the uncertainty that had once dulled her perception. And she knew that some moments, some conversations, and some people serve as turning points, subtle but powerful, awakening courage, reflection, and truth. And as the night grew quiet and peaceful around them, Emma finally embraced the realization that part 4 of her journey was about choice, the choice to see herself clearly, to nurture the love she had, to honor truth, and to carry forward a heart that had been awakened without breaking anything. And that choice, quiet but profound, had already changed everything.